Hi, I'm Karen Derricades, and you're listening to We Make Media, a podcast about how the culture we produce shapes media and how that goes both ways. So I'm here with famous new media artist Jeremy Bailey in the very space where he recorded many of the 97 episodes of Good Point podcast. Jeremy is a video and performance artist who uses digital augmentations of his body to explore how creativity and technology intermesh to solve problems and expand possibilities for self-expression.
Yeah, pretty poorly though.
He's also the head of experiences at FreshBooks. I've asked to talk to him today about the early days of YouTube, the podcast he produced with net artist Raphael Rosendahl, and the many incubator projects he's undertaken in his pursuit to liberate the cash-poor artist from a life of financial precarity. And we thank you for that.
I'll let you know when we've found a solution.
Yeah. So in 2005, a little thing called YouTube started, really shifting all kinds of things from, where we get information and how-tos and mentor each other and just the participatory media landscape that grew out of that. How soon after were you posting things?
Like right away. I was very excited because prior to that time, I'd been posting videos on my own website using like the QuickTime plugin, which was a thing. Like you had to add either the Real Player plugin or the QuickTime plugin to your browser. And so I had been posting QuickTime videos on my website. And so when YouTube came along, it just seemed like actually easier, to be honest with you. It wasn't even like, this is a cultural revolution. It was like, oh, there's a place where I can host my video where if there's like a lot of visits and stuff like that, it won't, the server won't shut down. Because I had an incident where a video of mine was a little bit popular and then I couldn't actually afford to host it. It's like, sounds like a crazy thing to say today, but I ended up having to host it with my university. It was like, anyway, it was like, back then, if you just had any video online, people were like, it's video on the internet. It's amazing. Right. So yeah, we don't have that problem anymore, thankfully. But so it was like, it solved like a bunch of functional problems. And then it became apparent that it was like the type of content people were sharing was a little bit different and really kind of relatable to me in terms of what I was interested in kind of studying at the time, which was the history of performance for the camera. But it seemed like, oh, now everyone's doing that. And it became kind of apparent that we had reached kind of like a lot of artist subcultures end up becoming mainstream culture. And it was like we're on the verge of a mainstream movement, or what I would have called at the time like a mainstream like adoption of the aesthetics of narcissism, which of course you would call like a video on YouTube.
Yeah. Kind of the era of performance. Ushered in this very self-aware
persona and like now we have like cloud rap. It's like it's gone so far beyond that, like where almost all the internet platforms have some version of what you would have called 1970s performance video. But it's kind of cool to watch that happen.
Yeah. So before that you were showing them in galleries, you were showing them on your own website. Mm-hmm. And when did you develop this persona? For listeners who don't know, you've got this YouTube performance persona who's kind of a naive YouTuber 1.0, just enthusiastic to have the world. The
world's attention. Yeah. He's definitely embracing that like moment of like anyone can be famous. But that started to emerge, I think, in reflection to like a bunch of things. One, like prior to YouTube, actually, I had started to satirize new media a little bit because as like a white male, you hang out with other white guys, but then you like, hopefully you talk to a few non-white guys and they're like, how come all those dudes are so mean? Like, and how come like they don't let us like play with the technology and they say we're stupid? And so realizing that was me, sort of took on this self-deprecating tone, but also like I felt partially responsible. And if you look at art historically, we're actually represented by the same gallery, but and I think he knows this because I've talked about it publicly. But David Rokeby, was a Canadian new media artist that I had studied and was very much like the black turtleneck and glasses, but like working on hardcore technology and like this changes everything about how we create, but only I can use it because I have captured the energy and the life force of the computer.
Right.
And I found it really interesting because it's like almost this transference of ego, but it was also gatekeeping. And my background's in like kind of sociology from my undergrad. And so, gatekeeping is a way of exerting power and privilege that's really like a social injustice, right? It's like, one form of gatekeeping that everyone's familiar with is walking into any corporate board. Maybe that not everyone's familiar with this, but like walk into a room, like a conference, and it's a room full of marketers or a room full of architects or designers or even artists. And they'll start using language and acronyms that are not familiar to you. It's a form of gatekeeping because it prevents others from engaging with that group, but it's how we determine who's in and who's out.
Right.
But very much in like art and technology is like a narrative of who's out and who's in, and it for me was really interesting because it contradicted my background and understanding of video art, which actually was a movement of inclusion.
Right.
Because prior to video art's invention, the television and video was an exclusive media available to news broadcasters, major networks, that kind of thing. So to be on television was like a huge breakthrough that we actually got to put our faces on TV when the first video cameras came out in the late 60s. So video art was really early on about that, about like, hey mom, I'm on TV. Like there's so many video artists that were just basically doing that.
Right.
Including the mentor that got me started, Colin Campbell, was a Canadian video artist who explored persona and specifically queer persona in a media that had been, again, when you talk about inclusive versus exclusive, had exclusively omitted, the identities and narratives of what you might have considered marginalized folks at that time. So you weren't getting women were in the kitchen in a sitcom. They certainly weren't Martha Rosler, who was like gesturing to cut off your penis. Like that wouldn't make broadcast television.
Right.
So
yeah,
there were just like artists that were turning those power structures on their head, which I love. Anyway, didn't seem to think that was wasn't happening in new media, I didn't feel it. And so I thought I think we've made a lot of progress probably since then, but back then anyway, it was like, okay, well there's something I could do here. There's something interesting. There's something got disconnected. Let's see if we can play with that.
Yeah. Many people, I work with many young people who don't know before, who don't know, for me as a young person, if you told me in Southern Ontario as a 14-year-old watching Do the Right Thing that Spike Lee would be talking to people on Instagram, and, I would have blown my mind.
Totally, yeah.
But there are many now who just,
I read an interesting article the other day about the death of the paparazzi. Like, you don't hear about the paparazzi outside of England, because what ended up happening is the paparazzi, you became your own paparazzi.
Right.
Why would anyone need to read a tabloid when they could get on Instagram kind of thing and get the deal? And really it was also like the celebrity took their media back, you know? They took control back. So
that's so funny because I'm always saying that at children's events from trying to get a picture of my child, but I'm always like paparazzi out of the way because there's just a bunch of parents around, right? Documenting every moment, and you're like, I want the picture of the child, not the 10 people. Right?
That's so funny because
we're our
those same
own.
Parents are like, get off your phone, stop using TikTok. It's like, it's okay if you do it. Let the kids own their own media.
Yeah, you don't want your kids to be obsessed with their phone or screens. And I'm like, oh, like us, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you remember what the first post you ever put on there was?
On YouTube? Was probably one of my Video Paint 1.0 or one of those videos from that era. Maybe World's Strongest Man was like the video that crashed, which is a video where I hold a camera out at arm's length. That was the last video I posted that like I had that story about my own servers crashing. So I think it was right around 2005. This video called Video Paint 1.0,
right?
Which I demonstrate painting software.
Yeah. So you tell me about YouTube. So for the current YouTubers, like what did it look like and feel like then, and how did it look different than now?
I mean, there were a lot of similarities, but there was like a lot less polish, obviously, and there were tons of people. The idea of user-generated content, you don't hear those words very much anymore, but was like really rough. Like, kind of the webcams that existed were like pretty poor quality, and so there was a lot of experimentation. People just trying things out or just saying random stuff, and that stuff kind of still exists, but it's been drowned out by increasing quality and polish to the point where it's hard to distinguish between what is like, almost like what you might have seen on TV 10 years ago and what YouTube is now. And even like obviously ads, there were no ads back then. There was a lot more hate in the comments. So
There
like
were
that,
more hate. Oh,
yeah, it
okay.
was just, or maybe it was just as bad. Like you hear about YouTube comments being bad. They were bad then too. Like that hasn't changed. I thought it was a step up because I used to get hate mail. Like I would get like physical mail or mail via email, which was hateful. And I was like, oh, I can manage these comments at least. But yeah. But I think the main thing that changed is just that and which you'd expect from any media, like different norms got established and norms for quality. And so less and less kind of experimentation, more like genres emerged. Like, so genres like,
Box opening.
Yeah, like exactly, box opening, like tech reviews, like Twitch style streaming kind of stuff. Like that's a huge genre that didn't exist at all back then. But it's obvious that these genres, emerged and that they exist, and these are kind of tropes. But I like the early days because everyone kind of knew each other too. If you were a personality on YouTube, and especially among artists, like Petra Courtwright and I became really good friends at that time just because we were artists who chose YouTube. Same way maybe a few years later, Amelia Allman came along and did stuff on Instagram. We were establishing the norms of that media. And yeah, I mean, obviously, like I adopted a lot of what became the testimonial video style in mine. And that was an emerging style at the time. And then like, I think, other artists went on to do stuff where they would troll or do interesting work within the emerging norms. I think to troll now is pretty tough because like, people just click next. Like there's so much content and showing up in the algorithm, like that's a thing that didn't exist then as well. There wasn't really like an algorithm. There was like search. Like there was no feed that you were kind of building for. Yeah.
And could you subscribe and stuff and all that at that time?
You could subscribe, yeah, but very few people would like say click and subscribe or like review and subscribe at the end of their videos. Like that said, I should also say like some people were playing with it. Like Petra, who I mentioned, she would use all of the like hashtag her videos for popular search terms. So she'd use like pornography search terms and stuff, because what were people looking for? Yeah. So yeah, and to play with like how people were being found. So I think like, some of that stuff was emerging, but it was like pretty experimental early on. But I think like the style that emerged was like the testimonial style was not about edits. Now there's all these like, I'm sure you recognize there's like these special like editing styles that people write about and talk about on YouTube where the like kind of the ironic video edit gesture of like, emphasizing mistakes in the video. I'm like, have you seen this on YouTube where it'll be like someone's like, yeah, like meh, 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 and they're like meh, 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 and then they zoom in on it again. It's like meh, 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 meh. And they'll just like take any error and like make fun of it. So there's this reflexivity, and that's
outtake.
Yeah, exactly. A version of a meme for video, but as an editing style, that's like probably become like now standard style for YouTube, but didn't exist then for sure, because that's like a level of self-reflexivity that you'd have to be pretty avant-garde to have imagined then, but now it's just like any teenager kind of gets that.
Right. And now a lot of the unedited live direct stuff, has gone into
Twitch,
live,
live,
like, hi, here I am.
Yeah.
And then you don't, certainly it cuts back on time of thinking about the footage. But also, speaking of that, I mean, you had to hold on to the footage, right? I mean, the videos, you had to have a lot of the stuff now is done directly, and it's Instagram is carrying is doing the holding of the actual data.
I mean, you would back your stuff up, kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I always had tons of hard drives for sure back then. That was my number one expense every year. But I think, yeah, now you would just, everything's in the cloud. YouTube, though, did host your file, but just at a shittier resolution.
Right.
So, yeah, like wasn't like a 4K situation right then. It's like, people didn't have the bandwidth to stream that anyway. But it is funny because I'll often get asked, like, some of the videos from that era I still show, and the curator will always ask, like, hey, can we get a high-res version of this? I'm like, that is the version that's the native resolution that I was able to record at that time. We kind of forget about this dirty middle digital period between VHS and like 4K, like high definition HDR videos. We know it now.
Right. So you were making videos, and then you went to YouTube, and now you're taking YouTube videos and showing them in galleries at times. So the YouTube came off the
it was almost impossible to show just like it on YouTube, which I probably would have preferred early on, but because early on that was like not possible, I think it just became the norm among like a bunch of the artists I've already mentioned too, just to like throw it on a USB stick and show it in the gallery. And the aesthetics are portable, kind of thing. But it's true, like probably should be viewed within the browser experience. And like I think Rhizome got involved in making that possible. I don't know if you follow them online, rhizome.org, but like they created this thing called NetArt Anthology, and a special preservation method for like capturing like all of the like chrome like of YouTube specifically for like Petra Courtwright's webcam video, which is just got into the MoMA, but like making sure that you can watch in its original context. The same way you might want to watch like, I don't know, a 70 millimeter film on 70 millimeter film in a theater rather than watching it on your phone or something like that. Right. So there are people that have worked to figure out the preservation of that context. Personally, I don't really give a shit because like I'm of the school of thought of the early video artists, which is like the video was so fragile early on that it was like part of its what was cool about it was its actual vitality as a living thing, that it could decay and die was like reflective of the media itself, and that it was impermanent and spontaneous and ephemeral, the same way like Snapchat kind of nailed it with auto deleting videos and stories and stuff, because that literally if you recorded something in 1971, your presumption was that it would be non-playable in 1972 kind of thing. Like this stuff didn't have a shelf life. It was created for immediacy, and that was coming out of an era of Fluxus experience driven art making where they didn't want the artwork to be commodified. They wanted the artwork to be an experience that you had and then it was gone. And no one got paid, unfortunately, but that was like the whole premise, is that this is not art for bourgeoisie, this is art for the people. It belongs to us, it belongs in our heads and in our lives, not in like a gallery or in a storage facility.
And so the audiences that you found and formed there, like, are they, the communities that you found and formed there, do they migrate with you? Did they migrate to other places? Are they still there? Or,
I think that group, if I was to, like, I kind of straddle an era, like, but what evolved out of the group of artists that were making work and kind of communal at that time was this post-internet art movement. So, which is a natural evolution, was like, okay, there was obviously net art in the 1990s, and people refer to it that way, as this like 90s net art. And then we were part of like a second or third wave of folks that were using, Web 2.0 technologies, socializing online. Social media was new, like Facebook. I was signed up because I was at university. And so you're doing like, I do my studio visits on Facebook.
Right.
But eventually it was like those artist careers started to progress a little bit. But as a career progresses, one asks oneself, like, how do I, finance this life that I enjoy? And so I think, post-internet was, people not like that I'm saying this, like, was a natural response to how do I survive as an internet-based artist? And so like a lot of artists started to experiment with, because how do I make like this intangible thing tangible so I can sell it, basically? And the reason people might not like that is because they might not remember that people were trying to sell videos or figure out how to sell stuff online. And actually, Raphael, who I record the podcast with, had this artist contract that he made public because he was really believed in selling websites, and which is a cool idea, because he's like, the idea of the canvas is obsolete. The canvas is now the browser. And you can sell it using this contract, kind of thing. But the truth of the matter is, like, the art sale is embedded in what you just described, the obscurity or scarcity of the object and its lack of reproducibility. So finding ways to make it less accessible became a way to make the art more valuable, which is like, again, I feel like, the reason it's maybe an unpopular position is because it's like a contradiction of the original social contract that art was made under, which was one of inclusion rather than exclusion.
Right. I feel like it's fair, though, for it to be complicated, right? I mean, commercialization of the internet is much like gentrification, right? So it's like artists create all this value, they make this really interesting thing, everybody comes, and then they're like, then they turn it into money, and then the artists are like, hey, like, what about my money? And they're like, oh, you shouldn't be such a capitalist. And it's like, well, wait a second. Exactly. I helped build this value.
Exactly. Those platforms like YouTube and Instagram, we built those platforms, right? Like, we did not monetize the opportunity. I think it's kind of ironic, because probably the artists that were there early were in this gentrification position, but didn't take advantage of it, right? Like, they were new to the warehouse, and they're just like, they didn't. I don't think we saw the economic potential of it. But I think also coming out of the spirit of the 1990s internet. And I love 90s net artists because they have this politics still alive in them, of like pretty grassroots, like punk politic that the art on the network really belongs to be free, and it's a political act. And the early internet was, even in a commercial context, full of this idea of equality and opportunity and democratizing information exchange, and kind of the same idea talked about earlier when video came along, of dismantling the industrial media complex. But again, like, I think that's probably, we're in a down part of a wave, and that wave will probably resurge in some way. Maybe not on the internet. I don't know. Maybe in some other media, but that spirit doesn't feel alive on the internet. I'm not really judging it. Like, we're in a prosumer kind of era. Everyone is both a consumer and a producer of content, and that's maybe we did fulfill the promise. It's just like the economics still seem to sway toward the few rather than the many.
But because now it's more about the influencers and the Instagram and stuff, and
but it's always been about
audiences.
Influencers.
Of course.
One of my first jobs was in like advertising. I was like a trend spotter when I was like in my early 20s.
Right.
And we published like a PDF report on we'd send swag to influencers, but it wasn't what it means today. It was just like celebrities, but minor celebrities, basically. That was what it was.
Well, I remember, learning many years ago, but also repeating it in workshops with young people, like in like culture jamming, like advertising stuff.
Yeah, culture jamming stuff.
Being like, did you know that like there are people who get paid to like wear these like cool skateboards? It's like, now you say that, people are like, of course. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's like, that's, you don't even. In fact, you can't even tell the tail and the head, because often people will make fake advertorials to attract. But what I wanted to ask you is, when did you add the self-proclaimed new
I never got to that. I think I was hanging out with a friend actually at the AGO, this guy Steve Cato, who used to be famous in Toronto because there was graffiti about him. But anyway, like, he's an old friend, and I was joking that I needed to get like swag for myself as an artist, and we were like, well, what would you put on? Like, I was gonna get fountain pens, and he's like, what would you put on the fountain pen? And I was like, I'd put famous new media artist, and that got it started. That's like the real story. And then the like story that I thought of after that was like, this would be really good as like an SEO project for the internet, because Google and was like emerging as the primary marketing platform, and so how do you get recognized became like something that I was just interested in, because I was thinking of power and ego, and I thought like people search for the best of or the most famous, and wouldn't it be great if I could just like repeat this thing over and over again and hack that, so that if someone typed in famous new media artist or famous new media artist, I would appear as number one in search, which is true to this day. I do, just through like sheer like repetition.
Right.
Even just stating it myself was a power hack. So I mean, as advice to anyone, like come up with a tagline and then eventually like it's self-prophesizing through the internet because the algorithm doesn't know. Never got the pens made.
Right. Yeah. But the idea of kind of, you know, like the artist as the startup, right? It runs through a lot of your stuff.
That was the thinking. I was like, I just need marketing material. We were joking about like artists producing marketing material, and then and so the natural step was like, okay, well, what's online marketing material? But yeah, I do really like that's what I do now. So I've also been working in a startup for over about 10 years. So I started incorporating startup language into a lot of my work and making fun of it in my videos, which. First I was nervous about. Now I realize everyone makes fun of it. Like, but it was a bit. At first, you felt a little sneaky. Like, by day, like I'm saying, like we got to be lean and use an MVP, and then by night, I'm like I'm laughing about that and putting in my work. But yeah, I think everyone's well aware of startup aesthetics. Is like the language has come out of startup and become mainstream now, so enough that we can poke fun.
Like the YouTube star or whatever, or
they were becoming brands, for sure. Yeah, there was that, and there was a lot of brand of me kind of writing at the time too. So it was a natural thing. Everyone was kind of talking about it. I certainly can't claim it, but definitely like, as an artist, I was interested in what happened in the 1970s, like I said earlier, which is a lot of artists develop persona as a way of managing the self-reflexivity of like, now I'm famous, so how will I perform myself as a famous person? Like you look at like William Wegman maybe as an example, who like his videos of that early era, or Colin Campbell I mentioned early. Wegman did like these television spots and these little short snips that you would think belong on YouTube today, and he included his dog on top of everything, which is like it's like so savant of him. It's like might as well have been a cat. It's like and so it'd be like amateur advertisement with dog, you know, and that was it. That was like, and there are these short, you know, he did lots of these little shorts, but it very much was like him reperforming, like, you know, when you're a kid, you want to be, you know, the first video you make's like a news broadcast or something like that. So reperforming the media, the history of that media, but with himself in it, and that kind of upends the power. So I was just really interested that was happening again on the internet, or that like when the means of production ends up in the hands of many, they tend to just reperform, you know, the power. And so, but that's where we're at, right? Where everyone's kind of performing power.
Building a name for oneself is much like building a brand for oneself, right? Or a language through your work and a body of work. And because marketing and advertising and the commercial world and capitalism is so pervasive, you almost see these things around you, right? You're an artist and you look at the newspaper and go, hey, wait a second. What if I sold a painting like this, right? What if I did a banner like the very interesting project that you did
Museum.
with the
Well, yeah, that was just very much. So I did this project called the U Museum, where I use marketing retargeting, which is like cookies to follow you with banner ads. But like, yeah, that was just because I was in a meeting at work and people were like, we should be doing this thing called retargeting, which was like a new technology at the time. I was like, what is that? The ads follow the customers around the internet. I was like, that's creepy. Well, no, but we control it so it doesn't seem creepy. You know, we do these things. I was like, well, what if it was creepy? That would be that would be more interesting. Of course, we ended up where we are now, where everyone is like super creeped out. Like I just got some earplugs in the mail from Amazon because I asked it about snoring, you know?
Right.
And it's like, here's a free sample of earplugs for your partner because you asked about snoring.
Wow. I know, and then it'll all go away, and then we'll be like, no, bring back the easy recommendations. Now I got to search and be like, which search word do I put first to get the thing?
That's true. Like, put me back in the amniotic fluid.
Your partner's so annoying.
Reattach.
Put me back. Start it all over again. From the YouTube and the world audience to the podcast and this kind of bubble. like this intimate conversation between two established artists. What brought you guys to doing that together?
Yeah, well, like many things, just a conversation. So Raphael Rosendahl, who's like a great internet artist, who's done all kinds of early work, like I said earlier, on like the website as an artwork. Him and I just became friends early on, and he loves talking. He's like a Tim Ferriss, and he's like super efficient. He's very profitable as an artist. He spends 3 hours a day like working as an artist, and then he has all this time left over. And he's just like very punctual. He's like a Dutch person, so it's just like not to stereotype Dutch people, but he's like really organized, gets this shit done, and he's like, everything's very simple, like, and very iconic, and it's like, well, of course, people want this. I will give them this.
Right.
And then I'll charge this much. And then they give me the money. And then I spend the money. But so we had always gotten along. And he also had a very different point of view all the time. Like he was, he always just had a unique point of view. So we became friends and we would chat. And he liked to Skype and just have conversations. And then with the conversations we have, or if I'd visit him in New York or wherever, were always like, yeah, just interesting and fun. And we're like, how come, like, how do we make this accessible to more people? Should we record these? And ultimately, him and I chatted like that when we did studio visits or we talked to younger artists, they just don't have access to that type of conversation. And just a lot of people don't. And like, and the questions they ask are really like things that you take for granted as you've kind of struggled through an art career. And so we were just like, well, we want to talk. If there's value in like just being open and honest, we'll find out. If we don't, we still got to talk because we wanted to talk anyway. So it was like two friends just getting to hang out. And yeah, we built up a small following, which was really beautiful in a way, and then we started to remind us both of the early internet, because people would email us, like, remember email? But like they would, but they'd email us nice things and like long form notes and say, talk about their lives. And then we started interacting with them on the podcast, and they'd send us like bits and pieces of their lives, and we would reflect that back to them. And so it was like this, like building a community, which maybe sounds super obvious, but like, that was something we also craved, and turned out other people did as well. So we actually stopped it about 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, and then recently started to resume it. But one of the reasons we stopped it is because Raphael and myself, to a lesser extent, started to get nervous that we were giving bad advice. It's like, and who are we to give advice? Like I challenged Raphael on that because I'm like,
just two people. I mean, yeah, that's not from a, and I'm sure you've heard from many fans, but I mean, yeah, for me it was very much a continuation of those conversations. When you're in art school, you have these great conversations.
When they stop,
and as soon as you leave, there's like the work.
Yeah, you definitely don't get authentic art conversations. They're very rare. So because like I was joking with another artist the other day, like, artists are just extremely critical people, and through their bizarre and twisted like criticism, they get to like fun conversations. Like the conversation is just more fun,
Yeah.
Like,
well, our criticism is love, right? I mean, I think it's engagement, right? Like it's like when you really engage with something, you're thinking about it critically. I mean, again, maybe that's an artist.
I think it is. I think it's something you like teach in art school, right? It's like you can't look at anything, and if you didn't. So, for example, in art school, if you don't say anything, it's the biggest insult to everyone in the room, and especially to the creator, right? And so, but then like you get into
like you're saying you're getting nothing from it, yeah.
Yeah, but I run into this like every day because I run a design team, right? And like if I state like a matter of vision or fact, sometimes it can offend people because like, ooh, how dare you like reframe the conversation,
right?
That's like, it's hard to challenge that. Well, of course it is. Like you really have to deeply kind of want to, like you have to be like, oh, here we go, like this is like, let's get in the fire, let's figure this out, kind of thing.
Yeah, there is some kind of intellectual sparring happening, or it's
pretty snobby probably if you think, but it's fun. Like I think like almost every artist I've ever met like enjoys sparring, that way. Yeah. I've come to love though that a lot of artists have this like personality type where they at least like as artists become established, a thicker skin, where they're willing to poke and prod each other and each other's work, and it's not a big love in every time, and challenge ideas. and ideals.
Yeah, and the value of that critique.
I have very few, if any, artists, friends who are not artists, though, actually, because I just can't hang out with non-artists anymore. It's just horrible. But just because I can't have a candid conversation without people getting like not getting it or feeling offended by what I'm talking about. So.
But you're around so much tech and business,
well, I like CEOs a lot. Like I like, and I like horrible executives and things like that. I like people. I actually like those people because they're more similar to artists in that they have even though they're misusing their power a lot of times, they also have no filter for their thinking. And so, they'll put it out there and they're expecting to be challenged back. Made great friends with a lot of folks like that. Specifically in the realm of tech, there's this role in every company called a product manager, and they're like, they actually have no skills, and they'll tell you this themselves. They're like, I don't, they pay me, but I don't have no skills. Yeah. However, like I am really good at like critical thinking and like taking multiple points of view and synthesizing an opinion. And I'm like, you sound like an artist.
Yeah.
I've ended up like working with, and I founded or co-founded a program to teach product management actually because I really just enjoy hanging out with those types of people because they actually operate under the same kind of mantra of debate gets us kind of to the best idea.
Right.
I do love a good discussion, good debate. And so to bring it back to the podcast, like Raph and I, like the idea was we wouldn't plan this thing out because if we scripted it out or we felt like we could produce it, we wouldn't arrive at an authentic point of view. And the reason we called it Good Point was we would start every episode with maybe an idea of what we would talk about, but maybe not. And the whole point is we'd arrive at a good point because in artist conversation, somehow you leave the conversation like better than you started. That's almost like, I don't know, in a lot of artist conversations, sure there are blows sometimes, but I think most of the time artists like challenge each other and then they somehow get to some like greater understanding on both sides. And
absolutely.
Great studio visits operate that way, as you've mentioned several times, you know.
Yeah, you like leave on with the whole new,
it's like it's actually a kind of a form of gratitude and gift giving in those studio visit moments. I'm sure you've had a few really delightful ones where there's a give and take, and then at the end, both parties have kind of come away with a gift from the other. So we were really exploring that, and having a different point of view. Like I couldn't be more different than him in a lot of ways.
Right,
is what allows us to get to a better point in my opinion. So even though like there are people who take favorites in our fan mail for sure,
right.
And that was fun. I mean, we liked that. So,
yeah, well, he has a very European sensibility, and you have a very Toronto sensibility, right? I mean, there's
that's the first time anyone said that. I like that idea that there'd be a Toronto sensibility. Like queer people talk about queerness a lot more in Toronto, I would say. Yeah. And the Toronto art community, if we're going to talk about it at all, founded on people, that were really passionate about like the queer community here and building that out as both a visual and cultural mythology and narrative, whatever you want to call it, like all kinds of cool stuff. Also, like there was part of it that didn't fit for me, if I speak candidly for a moment, which is that I was doing stuff with technology, and that definitely is not part of the Toronto aesthetic. And so one of the things that pushed me online as an artist early on was like I was seeking out my community because I couldn't find it locally. In fact, like the local term for me was nerd, right? Like, and so I really felt like no one showed my work, and still to this day, no one wants to show. Like in Toronto, I almost never show my work, and I shouldn't. Like, it's probably my own fault, but at the same time, like early on, I was just like, why can't I be a part of this? And it would be like, no, it's going to be about grimy queer aesthetics. It's going to be punk leather, Jeremy Leather. It's gonna be like, why can't I? Yeah, and I was like, well, what about my laptop? Could I bring that to the... I think like the aesthetics, obviously, like that were mainstream then are, well, and they weren't, like that was just the predominant aesthetic. I mean, since then, there's a lot of cool stuff that's happened on the internet, but trying to be cool, like cool and internet did not go together when I was starting out.
Oh, so, interesting. Right.
Like I'm working on something this weekend, like for a British fashion magazine with influencers, like that'll, it's like a sculpting with like Jeremy's software with key influencers, and I'm like, that would not have existed. Like, and if you look at the images, they're super cool looking people. I'm like, how do I have a right to be a part, like working with these cool people? But like, because it would have been for me, just like, I didn't think of myself as cool. I was trying to get into the cool kids club, but then no one was having what I was serving for sure.
Was there any geolocation online that was like, so, you know?
Yeah, most of folks were in Berlin actually, or New York, but it spread out across the United States. And then Berlin became a hub, and there's a strange number of Dutch people from Amsterdam and surrounding regions, and that's still true. They were really active and really part of that community, including Raphael actually.
Right.
And I don't have an answer on why that is, but it's similar to Canada. I think they like supported it and funded. The funding structure in the Netherlands was to support non-traditional media, similar to Canada. That's why I didn't understand why it wasn't cool in Canada. But in Canada, like, it was predominantly, if you look at the media art history, is a lot of big productions, but not a lot of small, cool experiments.
Right.
Video art was huge in Toronto, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like as soon as computers got involved, I can remember like I was represented by V-Tape, and I was like asking them, can you just like take files instead of videotapes? Because I don't use videotapes anymore. And this is like 2007 or something. And they're like, no, we have to transfer it to beta. It's like, well, this doesn't really make sense for me. And also, like, I distribute my work online. Is that like, when are you going to get a website going so that I can send people there? And they're like, well, you know, the database FileMaker Pro doesn't really kind of interface with our website. And it just like felt like they were moving way too slow. So no fault to them. I think like when Kim and Lisa and folks who founded that, they did a tremendous amount for the community. But then I just like wasn't finding my community locally. So the video art community kind of didn't become the internet art community. And I feel bad about it to this day though, because it just like, I mean, my last straw.
You feel bad about it?
Yeah, personally. Like my last straw was I pitched a show to a gallery and I had a really good curator lined up to write about and represent the show. It was to an artist-run center. And then like the idea was I was going to engage the local community and the administration of the gallery. And I was going to like uncover problems using like product design methods, which is what I use to make all my work. And then I would like create like a satirical product that kind of like unpacked the relationship they had within their community, because and they.
How long was this?
This was like probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
But the response I got was like, no way. Like the programming committee, many of my friends were on this committee, were like, we're not going to do this show. We don't care. You're just going to make us look bad. Right. So and they really felt like, and I was like, I'm not going to make you look bad. And what are you afraid of? If I talk to your community. And I still feel that there's this tension that's not really talked about in the art world in Toronto of the art world being separate from its community.
Right.
And traditionally speaking, like you said earlier, like mostly white artist community in like conflict with what is the most diverse city in North America. So I probably would have highlighted that. But what would that have been such a bad thing for a gallery to take a risk on that issue, and potentially, but maybe they were not ready to change, and I don't know.
Thank God for the internet platforms then, because the problem with that is that, yeah, I mean, and those things do happen online, right? I mean, sometimes to a toxic, whatever,
sure.
to get into cancel culture stuff, but, being called out, there's a certain accountability and visibility, that comes with the visibility of that you can't hide and that you can go to the street and that people can, so that's,
So I
very
think like,
guarded and
anyway, the bottom line for me is like the internet has always been my exhibition space for that reason, because it's like, didn't have to get through some like committee or panel to try something out. Like you just want to, as an artist, you just want to experiment and not have gatekeepers saying you can or cannot do this, or we're worried you're going to embarrass us. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. I'm an artist, right? I'm going to work with the community. Like I'm going to be responsible.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to talk to an audience. Like that's another thing that I like.
Whoa,
I'm going to listen to what
radical.
they say.
Yeah,
I'm going to incorporate their feedback.
Right.
But yeah, so anyway, I don't want to disparage the Toronto art community, but I just didn't feel like I fit in,
right?
And that they were really welcoming. So I know that they have welcomed other people, and I'm sure that they're good. There's lots of good people, and they're friends, but it hasn't worked out for me personally. Anyway, I think like at the end of the day, I would blame myself. Like you have to invest in your community, but I chose a different community ultimately, right? So it's not a surprise that once you make a choice that okay, my community is going to be online, or my community is going to be this other one that I'm not seeing here. That was an explicit choice. So no shade on the Toronto community, but it's not like my community. I can say that kind of without much doubt.
A couple of really cool things that you guys did, like offering the free advertising space to people.
No
to
one would
send
take
in.
it.
That's hilarious. But between that and the asking people to send in field recordings and stuff, it just really seemed like a zine, like a sound zine.
That's
like
a cool way of thinking about it. I never thought about it that way, but that's like the spirit, of like sharing and like not caring too much.
And a community of contributors kind of thing.
So we're gonna do movie reviews for a little while. I don't know. We might review other things, but he just wants to get away from having opinions about. I don't know.
Well, I'll miss those opinions. I'll miss those conversations.
Well, he still has tons of opinions. That's the thing. Like I'm not worried. I just kind of direct Raphael like a force or something, like sculpting him like an electromagnetic force. Anyway, I enjoy our conversation, so we're going to continue to do it.
Cool. Yeah. Well, there's 97 episodes of it, and it makes me think of like a zine that in the sense that it's just like. I'm gonna just put this there.
Yeah.
And then there's so much to go through it. Well, no, but they're not. They're not overly thought out. They're not overly produced, and they're passed around. And
I think that I didn't make that connection, but I think it's a great one.
You guys also did your show notes too, or like a treasure trove of.
That's my contribution. I listen on 2X, and I just like hang out on Google, and it's fun for me just to see if like I can cobble together, like a citation list, because like you don't realize how much you cite in conversation until you have to write out all of the references that are embedded in your conversation. So for me, like it became an interesting. I don't know if it's interesting to others, but it became an interesting challenge just to see like. How like embedded our conversations were, especially because we were talking about art. So, you could really turn people off if it becomes super embedded, right? Because it's like, I don't get that reference. What are you talking about? Duchamp reverberating aesthetics? What is that?
Yeah.
Like, so then to try and like cite everything.
I love that about it. But again, zany is kind of niche. It's kind of like,
but then I loved if like a student was like, oh, what was that interesting thing that Raphael said? Like I should go look up what Solowit was saying. And then, I don't know if anyone's done this, but folks have emailed me to thank me for the show notes, which has been nice. And then it also works for SEO, just like another SEO hack, which is like if someone was searching for Duchamp, they might also find our podcast. Yeah,
right. Interesting. Yeah, I recently included it in a bibliography for a research grant.
What?
Of like, because I was like, I got to revisit like all this McLuhan stuff and ways of saying. I was like, like there's, but it's true. There's like all of this stuff that I'm like, I got to get back to that.
She just said Ways of Seeing, which is John Berger's fundamental book on visual culture and how we see the world, like everything. Anyway, for our listeners, you should read. That's like every Art 101 like first book to read kind of thing. Like our expectation was never like it was always just to produce it and if like a lot of it and you would just catch it wherever it was. Like there's this. I used to have this mantra, which as an internet artist, because of the feed, like. The mantra I had, which is like satirical to a certain extent, but was like, I'll make more work of less value faster. And it was like based on this idea that in a stream, like it's what's new and in the moment that's more relevant than the quality and the upfront work. And it's like that fluxes the idea of being inside the experience. So the internet is really a lived experience. It's a living thing. It's always changing. And so whatever you made yesterday is like out of context today, and it's erased by the stream. The stream's just constantly going, but it's really liberating also just to like make without regret or without having to package or archive or whatever.
Right. You see people post like I'm gonna post something next week. I'm coming out with a newsletter. Stay
tuned. It's like, oh yeah, I'll be riveted.
The great thing about it is that if you don't put anything up, no one's missing you. You know what I mean? Like no one's like, it's not like somebody going to your site and being like, oh, they haven't updated anything.
Oh my God, I love that.
It's like, if you're not there, you're not there.
Yeah.
Like
this idea that people visit websites too, I find absolutely hilarious. Like, check out my website. But no one knows what you're doing on the internet. No one gives a fuck, you know, like they're lucky. You're lucky if they get on your LinkedIn profile or something like that. So
just to talk about some of that digital economies lab and stuff, and you know, I know that you did you actually patent these ideas, or you just drew patent drawings?
Okay, so I played with artist and economy throughout my whole career, like the economics of being an artist and of capital and startup culture and things like that as a factor of technology. That's how it started. Like just as an artist working with technology and then working in a startup and making fun of like artists using technology, you have to ask yourself, well, what is the root origin of that technology? It takes you to obviously the companies that invented those technologies. And in video art, that was like Sony released a very important camera called the Sony Portapak in 1967, 68. I always get the date kind of slightly off. And but it was the first consumer video camera, and then it was also the fastest selling home electronics device or consumer electronics device in history to that point. But there are like subsequently, like from that point to now, there's like a calendar of different consumer electronics devices that ended up in the hands of artists and that ended up being like the most successful launches. The last ones you might remember were like the Kinect camera for the Xbox, which a lot of new media artists still use, and I made work about that. And so, or the Nintendo Wii before that, like these basically these things that were created for one purpose, and then artists hacked them to do other things, and they became this huge. But they were also wrapped up in these huge consumer sensations, which made it even more attractive to artists, because artists, again, like I said earlier, want to reverse or like own that means of production, really unpack what it means culturally. So for me anyway, it was just like, what is the culture that's embedded in these devices, and like, you know, how do artists figure into that, and then how do I figure into that? And so and then ultimately, if you're going to be a famous new media artist that works with new technologies, why wouldn't you invent technologies? And then you are kind of inventing technologies. So what's different from you as an artist and what's the difference between a company and an artist? They're both like got these like innovation labs, or that language of innovation was really emerging out of like startup culture and Silicon Valley, and like language that was being used in that realm. I started seeing it seep into the art realm, and different artists start to play with that, but also outside the art realm, just like into general culture, like at dinner parties and stuff, and people referring to this language that I thought was exclusive to technology, but was becoming just like how we like navigated the world, you know, like, and how like Elon Musk was people's hero instead of like, I don't know, Barbara Streisand or something like that. Or I used to joke like, you know, our parents had the Rolling Stones and like we have Amazon, or put another way, it's like they had free love and we have free shipping. And so it's like, like at a certain point you just say like, okay, that is the just dominant culture. And so as an artist, you're like, well, I have a responsibility to like exist within the current context and cultural context. And so let's like figure out what's going on here. And so patents were just interesting to me because they were one of the ways that people were talking about power dynamics in tech. And there had been like various activities that had led to that.
Patent trolls.
And like Apple patenting, like what
is a patent troll?
A patent troll is someone who patents an abstract concept in software ahead of the curve, before the technology even exists sometimes, and then later goes out and sues people and asks them to license that patent, right? So like a lot of the early MP3 and online, like the idea of an MP3 on the internet, which, you know, so Spotify probably pays a lot of patent trolls because people in the 90s were like, or late 90s actually, because there's a very specific time where this became legal, would be like, okay, I'm going to like patent an idea for a jukebox on the internet that uses, you know, digital files, and so abstract that like, you know, there's so many technologies they're gonna have to use that idea, and they didn't have to build anything because they changed the law in such a manner that you could patent software. So prior to 1994, you couldn't. And it was because Bill Clinton appointed this software lobbyist, Bruce Lehman, to the patent office in the United States. And then they changed the law to make software patentable. Prior to that, it was only copyright. And so once it's patentable, you can patent the concepts that underlie, not just the actual writing, like a book, right? And so the concepts that underlie software quite often are very abstract, right? And then it became like a war to like hold on to the most number of patents and use that against other trolls or other companies. But anyway, so I was just really interested in that. And then I thought, well, as an artist, like, shouldn't I patent my stuff? And that thought didn't occur to me until I started looking at where patents were going. And they were going towards this place where people were patenting gestures, because computer software was no longer existed just on a computer. It also existed on a phone, and the phone was a touch interface. So touch interfaces meant your body was now included in the patent. I was like, wait a second, body patent? Like, so are you going to patent the way I express myself with my body? Well, if I have to license the way I express myself with the body within any given platform, that may be an interesting dystopia. And like augmented reality, which is a technology I'd been working with before the label existed, was like, like veritably attaching the software to your body. And therefore, like, it didn't take long for me to look up patents for companies that were investing in augmented reality and realizing that, not only would like finger gestures be included, but all kinds of body gestures. And so some of them are quite amusing, actually. Like
to look right or something, to get something to
like the
around.
peace sign, Apple owns the peace sign, or like Google owns like making a heart with two of your hands, or Microsoft owns like say what, putting your hand behind your ear, or I don't understand by putting your hand on your face near your mouth.
I did not realize.
Yeah, or taking a picture actually, just by which is an artist device, like framing a scene by forming two L's with your index and thumb. That is like a Google gesture for taking a photo. So it was just really interesting to see that that's where we were going.
Not realize that. My
and
God.
So like if you're using a Google phone, you could take a photo that way, but if you're using an Apple phone, that would never happen, right? And then you have to imagine there's this future where culture is technology and the technology is culture, and I'm an iPhone person, or I'm an Apple person, or I'm a Google person, determines how you might express yourself with your body. And so that was just like, that's a really fascinating line of thinking. So I thought I would start to patent a lot of my kind of my body kind of gestures in relationship to some of the artwork I was making, and to patent or provisionally patent other ideas. So when I say provisionally patent, it's like basically state that I'm in the process of filing the patent without going through the full legal procedure.
Right, because it's quite,
because it's expensive, basically. But that is like, it gives me the credibility of having begun the process, and therefore, like, theoretically, it's defensible. But
okay. Well, you'd be great, and then you would let us just use our own
gestures.
You
do whatever you want.
Put them in the Creative Commons and just let us do
I'm
things
not,
again.
I'm not the one who's going to sue you. Yeah, do whatever you want.
That's great.
You have to trust me, of course.
I love that.
Well, you were asking about the Digital Economies Lab. So, that's the patent stuff. Just I did become very interested in art and tech and the differences between the two. That question is like, what's the difference between an artist and the CEO of a tech company? And it seemed like the difference was like a whole lot of money. And I had to ask myself, why is that? And ultimately, uncovered that through research that the average artist, this research is obviously readily available. The average artist, though, internationally makes less than $10,000 a year. Generally speaking, artists are below the poverty line internationally, and considered among the most precarious group of specially skilled, quote unquote, workers. So they have more education, basically, than any other segment of the population in their income bracket, which is just like, jeez. And it's kind of like, it's obvious, but then you're like, okay, well, why is that? And so I started just being interested in that, and then thinking like, well, what if I kind of started or experimented with ways that artists could either subvert or make money by taking some of what I know from the tech world and transferring it. So like the idea of patents, but also I started like this kind of satirical accelerator for artists where we design products and make them available to the public. And so started just experimenting with that, using the methods from my corporate life alongside artists in the art world. And just like maybe I thought that might generate like new ideas or new like things that I didn't expect, because I just like to, like with the podcast, just like to experiment. Well, the like spoiler alert is like I haven't made any money this way, but I think it's generated new ideas, and I like those ideas just because they wouldn't be generated by the traditional media or the traditional mode of working.
How long before they're just co-opted by them?
That's a good question. Like,
should business be learning from artists, or artists be learning from business?
One insight I've learned about artists is they love starting things, they hate sustaining them. So yeah, it might just be a matter of like sustaining, right? Like, or that's me. Like, I will say, like, I only work with social practice artists in that particular project, because they're more in tune with the idea of an audience. So like I tried working with just any artists, and the ones who, like were revolted by it the most were the ones who like, this doesn't allow me to fully express myself. Like my self-expression is at risk if I have to consider an audience. I'll be like, okay, well, I'm not going to work with you, because like, that won't.
That's an interesting part of commerce, though. That is an equalizer. That is an inclusive,ness, right? That people are like, wait, but you have to consider your audience. So your audience is your client.
It's a great irony too. Yeah. Like that's been the irony of working on that project, is the people that are best at producing these, like what would be maybe traditionally be called like, capitalist products or something, are actually the ones that are the most socially engaged. So, but I like that concept that we might be able to like expand the access to their ideas socially as well. And so they usually get that too. And they're like, that's pretty cool. Anyway, so I've done that work, and then recently I started a lab. Well, I didn't start it. I was just asked to like help out with a lab in Ottawa, called the Digital Economies Lab that Art Engine, which is an artist-run center there, established. And we invited a bunch of artists. And the government of Canada is currently like looking for help. I did help also consult on a large grant, like a $90 million fund the Digital Strategies Fund to help like get artist-run culture and artists like working and leveraging these means of production that we've been discussing all day, which is like, don't be afraid of the podcast, don't be afraid of Google. Like, the government's obviously worried that like if artists don't keep up, they'll fall behind their audiences, and they did share a really interesting insight with me when we were working on the fund, which was that what they called the glossy brochure effect, which is like in Canada anyway, arts funding negatively correlates with audience attendance, and it was related. This glossy brochure effect is that the government has found when they invest more in the arts sector, like they pump up the grant amounts, that people spend more on the production of the ephemera of the exhibition, so catalogs, postcards, posters, that kind of thing. So your graphic designers and your printing houses get paid, but the artists don't get paid anymore, and there's not more audiences that attend. So, which was like a really like horrific in like aside for them to have admitted, but and their anxiety was with a potential conservative governments around every election or around every corner, if we can't prove that art in Canada has value, and we measure value currently by attendance, you could argue that they need a new metric, but I don't see anyone out there that has like any good ideas, right? And they should probably be doing that. That's probably another project someone could pitch. But we measure art by like the number of people that like socially consume it. Therefore, like if no one's going to this stuff, like eventually if it's just artists, and you've been there probably, like you're at your opening, it's all other artists at your opening, it's a little bit like an elitist club. So like how do we deal with that?
I mean, at an artist-run center, you get paid an artist fee because they are, for people who don't know this, they are getting funding from some kind of granting. So you're getting an artist fee. 7 people come to the opening. It's
true.
3 of which are students at OCAD who need to review it.
And that's not just in Canada. Like I've flown all the way to Austria to like perform for the 3 other people that were performing that evening, and no guests. Like, that was government funded. Like it happens, right?
Well, and then the flip side of that. I mean, I did a perform in a kind of interactive exhibit at Gladstone Hotel for Nuit Blanche one time, and 10,000 people came through.
Wow.
So that's amazing, and it's the only thing that anybody has ever mentioned to me, like, that was you, like, like in a future setting.
Yeah.
But It's like great. So yet you get the exposure, right? You get
Imagine
to,
if the
it's
artist
like,
run centers like really legitimately engage their communities, right? Like how awesome that would be. Like, and if it was more than 7 people that showed up, and they got, or maybe they started working together, like without politicizing against one another, which we know, like in Toronto anyway, has been an issue, right? Where people have fought over resources. Like, I think the government, like, the council or whatever is what I should say, really legitimately wants the art sector to work together, but they, like, from what I saw behind the scenes, was interesting as an artist, because I'm not like a career artist run center person, but they're like, why can't these people just like work together to get themselves out of, what we'll do? We'll put together like almost $100 million almost. And it's like, no one applied, the first round.
right.
And anyway, people are now. And I'm encouraged by the early results from this lab. I think we're probably going to like come out with stuff like artist guilds and unions and like different kinds of resources for artist run centers, but there's a whole bunch of ideas that are coming out of it. I'm encouraged, like that, it's snowball. It just has to, you start small and you build it up over time. I love exposing the behind the scenes of the art world, because you're in for example, every young artist out there who's like dreaming of their institutional show or the museum show needs to know you won't get paid for that show. And B, like the show will be funded by probably an arms dealer. So
Jesus.
like in many cases the boards of trustees of the museums that you're like you wish you could get into are made up of people from all kinds of dubious backgrounds that conflict entirely with your personal identity politics. So you have to be prepared for that conflict at the outset. And so to pretend we're preserving something super special is also like perverted in my opinion, because it's like, it's pretty ugly below, like just like scratch a little bit below the surface, right? It's not as like, I don't know. It's not as pure as like, or as simple as like, those are the capitalists and those are the pure artists, without any.
Yeah, so it's okay to burn it down then, because
Well, I think it's okay to build something better.
It's burning anyway, yeah.
Like I think it's okay to build like a better way, and to think about just because it was that way and your teacher said it was that way for 30 years, and it's going to be that way for another 30 years. Like that you could say like, actually no, I'm going to try something different. Like that's what artists have always done. They've experimented.
In the digital economies lab, you guys really put you in the committee or whoever it was that put forth those questions in the application. There's some really, really wonderful questions, I think, that kind of surface, what's at stake and all these things that we're talking about, and the choices that we're making, and the things that we're making, and I mean systems that we're making now to address some of these things. I wanted to ask you your own questions, basically. So if all your worst anxieties and deepest fears about the digital transformation of society were to come true, what would the future life of an artist look like?
I guess it's probably like a fun dystopia to describe, but it would be something where we don't have any control. Like we're all ascribed to platforms, but we don't have any control over those platforms. We can't really create anything outside of what we're told to create, right? We're just performing without any control. So there's no expression. There's just configuration or something. So I'm actually like not pro Instagram in particular, like because for example, like there's face filters and stuff like that, but like they're just like telling you try this one on. Kind of tells you what to do. Doesn't really give you the space to express yourself. So I'm much more like the guy that wants to get in there and tinker and like break it. So it would be harder and harder to break things. Things would be more and more secure. I'm almost like anti-security, anti-privacy, because these things represent forms of control. Don't worry, it's good for you. Well, I'd like to worry. I'd like to actually have all of the control. I'd like you not to tell me what's good for me.
And there's learning in that thoughtfulness too. Of
Because it's like a form of gatekeeping.
Creating those things. And
Like I didn't like, I'm not claiming citizenship in Facebook land or whatever. So anyway, that would be my dystopia. So the end of the free kind of creative space that drew me to the internet in the first place.
Around Christmas time, they had a contest of so they have developer software now for AR for the so Snapchat has it and Facebook for Instagram, right? So you can make these filters, and they gave out 3 prizes internationally. One of 25,000, one of 10,000. and 2 of 10,000. You know, it's like, so you're like artists. We're inviting you again. It's duplicating the same kind of bullshit, right? It's like we're inviting you to bring all of this time
for really cheap, because one designer on staff would cost them $100,000. So, I mean, I had a call with Snapchat when I was making all this face filter stuff years ago, and they wanted me to come work for their team because they said that they were inspired by my work. And then when I said, like, that's great, I'm an artist, like, I can only work 4 days a week, and they're like, no, that's not how this works. We'll get all your IP, and you'll work for us full time, but we basically own everything you've made. So it's like, well, you just said you're inspired by my work, and this wouldn't exist if I wasn't allowed to express myself, right? So I think that the two don't commingle very well. I just don't trust companies to act on behalf of artists. And that's why it's important that artists understand the tools, right? Like, and again, like, I in jest, I'm saying I don't agree with privacy and security, but what I really don't believe is in being like, pigeonholed or tracked. Like, I will never put my like gender identity down, and Facebook's never gonna be like, this is your face and we're tracking you across the. I just don't agree with this idea that 2 or 3 companies should control everything. So anyway, it's like a libertarian position probably or something, but not very controversial. But that would be my worst fear. Right. But also in that world, like, no, your artist run center is like completely meaningless too. Like they're just like, they're forcing their programming through the Instagram, like, absolutely. Straw,
That's true.
And it's like, we've all got, but we only get photography shows now or something like that. They're square photos. It just doesn't make any sense. So.
But is that why artists, I mean, in the context of the digital Economies Lab, or just all the stuff that you were talking about, does that mean that,
they see
is it possible for the artist to shape the business model so that the business doesn't eventually go, oof, the 4 days thing doesn't work for us. We don't want you to have the time to do the thinking about the thinking before the making. Like, you have to be a machine. Like, are those things possible to
I think
to
so.
meld? Yeah.
The internet was created by people, and like artists are people. So like we can generate new things. That's my position.
So if you, in your wildest, most beautiful dreams about the digital transformation of society were to come true, what would the future life of an artist look like?
I mean, first of all, the artist would be the one like pushing us forward, not like running or trailing behind. And they'd be pushing for new ideas, and maybe they're not making a ton of money doing that, but they're making some money because they're the ones establishing the new norms for how they make money and how their creativity is monetized. But they're taking back control. They're learning from the capitalist, or they're learning from the socialist. They're learning from all of the greatest people, as artists have always done, to advance new ideas and new ideals, new ideologies. And they're bringing people along as one community, or maybe several communities, but they're acting as a community to help each other. So I mean, that would be ideal for me personally. That's what I imagine. They're certainly not like keeping secrets and like stubbornly refusing to move forward or move anywhere. They're thinking and experimenting and sharing, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you. It was like a lot of fun.
And thanks to everyone out there who listened to this series of We Make Media. Come back for the next series of 8 episodes when I'll be talking with media makers, technologists, and educators about new literacies. Until then, stay creative and do be artists.